Now, Erie's premier podcast. News about music, health, and what's happening. It's Breakfast with Nat the Hat in the 814, sponsored by Erie Insurance.
Well, hello. We've got a special spotlight series going on today on our podcast. You know, it's getting up close and personal with Dr. Denny Woytek, our night guy.
Boy, is that scary. Up close and personal. I wonder why it was so hot in here. It's a spotlight. That's what's doing it.
You know, Denny, back when we did the Christmas show, it was so nice to get everybody together in here. And I only got like 10 minutes of your time to even talk about what you do. And then I'm like, you've got to come back because you really have a storied past when it comes to broadcasting. So let's start from the very beginning. Are you originally from the 814?
Yes, born and raised. We had a house on 32nd and Green Garden.
Oh, so you were a West Sider.
Yeah. Well, for only like 3 years, and then my dad was killed, and the house exploded. So we moved on to my grandmother's house, which was on 2nd and Wallace. And
so you were down in Polish neighborhood.
Oh yeah,
then.
we lived with her for I don't know, maybe a year, 2 years, and then got a house on East 5th and Reed.
Still down in Polish Town.
And then eventually moved out to 32nd and Florida, or Pine Avenue.
Gotcha.
So
where'd you go to high school?
I went to high school at Erie Tech.
You were an Erie Tech guy.
Yeah, I
Graduated what year?
67.
And then where? Did you go into the service right after that?
I did, because I was worried that I was going to be drafted and then have to go to Vietnam. So I decided, okay, well, I'll join the Navy, and I'll be a photographer, because I was the yearbook photographer at Tech. And they said, no, you're going to be a CB, and I had no idea what a CB is.
You know what? And here's the other thing, too, because I've got the DVD, the CB DVD, and I just want to know more about that. Like, what is a CB?
Well, CB is a construction arm of the Navy. They also build things for the Marines. You know, they like make the beaches nice and pretty, so when the Marines land, the photographer has some nice, pretty pictures. Oops, sorry. And so they're construction. I was a construction electrician. There's builders. There's pipe fitters. There's heavy equipment operators. There's also each one has a specialty.
So what you do is, as a group, you go somewhere and you do all the necessary things to set up a base, I would say.
We build the bases and we build the huts, or the hooches, as we used to call them.
Hooches.
A lot of plywood. And sometimes we have some material that maybe shouldn't be there, like wormwood mahogany paneling that was supposed to go to some commander somewhere. Somehow it wound up in our hands. CBs are known for acquiring things.
So how long were you a CB?
4 years.
4 years. So you were in the service for 4 years then.
Yep. And then 2 or 3 years in reserves, which really didn't mean anything. It just.
So as a CB, what was your first build?
I had to construct a generator system for a MASH unit in Quang Tri, which is up in the northern part of South Vietnam. And I built a 3-generator shed that would provide constant power for the operating rooms and all that. That was my first real job, and I was really proud of it too, because I had never done anything like that before.
Sure.
So that was the first build that I put together, and we did maintenance on other, generating systems, but. That's when I heard that they wanted to build a radio station.
There we go. Now you're piquing my interest.
They wanted to build a radio station,
Okay.
not the CBs. It was Armed Forces Vietnam Network wanted to build a radio station up where we were at, close to where we were at. And I heard about that they were doing that. I said, let me go up and see these guys, because I was a radio guy, started at JET in 1964. So
let's go back. Let's go back before this build and before the build of the radio station in Nam. Tell me about here in Erie. You started on JET?
Yep, started on JET. What would happen was I would walk down from 32nd in Florida down to the studios and 16th and Ash.
16 by ash,
Yeah.
as they would say.
And I would, there was a cement block, a cinder block that you could stand on and look in the window. So I would have my little transistor radio with me, and I'd be listening to usually Johnny Holiday because I was there at night. And
Who else? Who else was on
Jim,
at that time?
Jim Connors, Randy Michaels, of course, Frank Martin.
Yes.
And so
this was the AM dial.
this was the AM.
1400.
Yep.
Okay.
And my first job, well, after it rained one day really hard, and I was standing outside, and Johnny Holiday, I think, felt sorry for me. So he invited me in, which was his first mistake. And then after sitting in the station with him for a couple hours and just watching him, I already knew how to run the board because just by watching them and listening to him, I could tell which dials did what and what. So I asked him. I said, "Can I get a job here?" So he had me come in and see Rick Hanna, who was the manager, program manager
Right.
at the station manager at the time, and he hired me not as an announcer but as a painter.
So what year was this then?
64. So he let me paint the base of the tower, which was on top of this warehouse or something. And I painted the base of the tower silver. And that was my first job. Now, I couldn't be on the radio because I didn't have a third-class radio telephone license with broadcast endorsement. So I had to drive to Buffalo, or somebody drove me to Buffalo, and took the test. Passed the test, and I had my third-class radio telephone, which meant I could take transmitter readings. It didn't necessarily mean that I could be on the air, but I could.
Wasn't that the same thing? Like I ended up with one of the little
Now it's a little card.
card,
But back
the
then
FCC
it was a.
And you had to go
roughly
take a test.
Oh yeah.
You had to take
it
a
was
test.
it was like 50-question test, and we managed to. It was really technical. Taking transmitter readings and doing all sorts of technical work. We had to be able to do that.
Right.
Yeah. So that's what.
I'm glad I never had to take a test, Denny. I just got the card.
It was.
I recall.
And it was tough.
So you take this test, Denny.
Yeah, and if you pass it, they'd let you know like in a week or so. Then they'd send you the certificate, which had to be posted at close to the transmitter. Mm-hmm. So I had the license, so I could take transmitter readings every half hour, every hour. I forgot what they were. And they had me as the overnight guy watching over Big Al Knight. Big Al Knight was on tape. There were voice tracks this is voice tracking back in the day. Mm-hmm. And it was run by Myron Jones, who owned the station. He owns a couple other ones in Youngstown and Pittsburgh. But his brother was running the show, and he would turn play the tape and then push a button, and then they had a little modified jukebox alongside the console, and they had 100 records in there. And it would play like 3 records and then stop, and then
that was a jukebox.
That was a jukebox, and then he would play the next voice track, and they didn't introduce songs. There was things like Big Al Knight here for all the guys working third shift tonight. Here's one for you. So I had to take transmitter readings and do news calls, call the police departments, and check and write news stories. Then eventually they had me doing the news. And Bob Sutherland had actually trained me.
Sutherland.
Sudsy and Jerry Tremblay. And
all names I recognize in the media world.
So they trained me of how to write the news and how to deliver the news. So then I was delivering news, and then eventually I was doing Sunday nights. And
were you as Denny Woytek, or did you have a different
I was there as
name?
Denny Woytek, yeah.
Great.
They let me use my real name, which is kind of unusual because most radio announcers have a When I worked at WRIE after the Navy, I had to use Denny Stevens. Which Stevens is my middle name, so that was
Denny Stevens.
Stevens. Yeah.
So then you're writing the news and you become the newsman. Was when you ended up leaving and going in the Navy, or how did all that work?
Well, that was like in '67. I graduated from Tech, And then I tried to figure what am I going to do with my life. And I didn't want to be drafted, so I joined the Navy. And of course, I did not become a photographer in the and go to the Mediterranean and things. They sent me to combat training school, underwater demolition school, and all that blow 'em up school, and then put me on a plane to Vietnam. And so that's how I got there. Now, had I not done that, I probably would have stayed at Jet. Now, after 4 years, they're not going to keep a job open for you. They said you're supposed to keep your job open, but after 4 years, and so when I came back, the job wasn't available. It was already filled. Actually, I think Ronnie G was probably
I was going to say
on the air at the time. But my love for AM radio, and especially the days of WJET, because that was that was rock and roll.
Mm-hmm.
And now right across from here where we're doing the podcast was the Commerce Building, right?
yes.
Yeah. On top of that Commerce Building was this massive radio tower, and that was WWGO, which was the other AM rocker.
Go Radio.
Yeah. And
Who was on Go back in that era?
Ron worked there.
Okay.
Ron said he
Sedgy.
worked there. Tom Lopez. Rich Rutkowski, I think, was there. And trying to think what else. But they had these massive old studios and they had because back in the old days of radio, they would do a lot of live broadcasting, not just playing music, but they would have orchestras and things. So they had a piano there. In this one, and inside the piano, if you open up the piano, there was a liquor store.
My kind of piano.
Yeah. So
Wow.
So it was Go and Jet. They're the two AM rockers, and WICU, which became WRIE, was kind of a middle of the road station, and WWYN, which had studios on State Street that you could actually look inside. You never see any announcers there because they were always running a ball game or something. So it was a control room, but you never saw anybody. So anyhow, after I talked to the guys in Armed Forces Vietnam Radio who were building a station, I go, I can help. First of all, I can probably get you a generator that's more reliable than the pieces of junk that they had, which I managed to do through.
So were you actually playing records in Nam?
Oh yeah, we were playing records. Yeah, we built
45 albums.
No, it was Armed Forces Vietnam Radio would issue LPs, and on the LP, a 12-inch disc, there would be 4 or 5 rock and rolls, a couple middle of the road, maybe a classical, maybe something else. So this was the music that they wanted the Armed Forces.
Really?
people to
So it
hear.
really was it not your choice? Well, I know in radio, they put the music out there, and that's the music you play.
Yeah. But we could play it. I mean,
Okay.
so every week we would get a disc with more and more records on it. So, but you wouldn't find things like "We Got to Get Out of This Place" or "I'm Fixing to Die Rag" or any of the Vietnam antis, anything that was controversial or that they wouldn't put it on there. However, since I was worked at Jet, Jim or Randy would send me a box of 45s.
Fantastic.
Which were highly against all. If I would have gotten caught, I don't know what they would have done to me. I was in Vietnam. What more could they do to me?
Right.
So
you were a jock in Vietnam.
Yeah, I had a morning show, 6 till 9 o'clock.
Were you
Monday through Friday?
Were you Denny Woytek for
I
them
was
too?
Denny. I was Denny Woytek.
Yeah.
We did everything.
Did you ever record anything? So you still have it?
We didn't have a tape. We didn't have a tape deck. We didn't. And the guys in Saigon did, because there's a lot of tapes from the guys in Saigon, like Adrian Kronauer and stuff. So I would start out my show. Now we weren't on every day because if we were under attack, we didn't sign on. We carried a feed by way of a telephone line from Saigon. So I would start out with "Good morning, Vietnam," not knowing that 2 years before that, this other guy named Adrian Kronauer was doing the same thing in Saigon. The movie came out. I was so distressed. I go, that wasn't my idea. that was somebody else who came up with that "Good Morning Vietnam" phrase. So I called Adrian or sent him a letter or something, and he was down in Washington, D.C., invited me down for dinner. And I had dinner with him, and I went, really very proper, and because, in Washington, he took me to a beer joint. It was a pool hall and chili house. And we had a great 4 hours of talking about the days of radio, about the movie, and how much Robin Williams stretched a lot of the truth. But it was really cool to be able to talk with him.
Right.
Yeah. So anyhow, after Vietnam, I had it was my turn to leave. I had 30 days before I was ready to leave. And then we had a little incident where I had to be helicoptered out to the hospital ship, the Sanctuary. So when I was out at the U.S. Sanctuary, after a couple of days, they let me get up and walk around. They had an onboard radio station in closed circuit and a closed-circuit TV station on the ship.
On the ship.
Almost all the Navy ships had one. But it was broken. So
what does a CB do?
he fixes it. So I fixed it, and then I started doing this. I have some pictures of me in my pajama wear, the Navy hospital wear, as I'm doing my morning show. And so I did a radio show, and I fixed a TV station, so that they could show films. They would show films on board.
What was the name of the ship, Dan?
USS Sanctuary.
Okay.
There was two of them, the USS Repose and the Sanctuary, and they would rotate between the two. They had, I think, the world's worst typhoon hit while I was on board. They actually strapped us in. They gave us some medication, and they strapped us in. So first of all, we wouldn't hurt ourselves, but also so we wouldn't, get too sick. So after that, I went back home, came back to Erie for 30 days.
30 days.
Yeah. No,
Okay.
My unit had no idea that I had even survived. Years later, when I go to a reunion or something, and they go, "Dennis, you're still alive." I go, "Yeah, I am," because I never went back to my unit. So I went back home, spent 30 days here. And then my next duty station was Alaska. So I was supposed to be stationed at the Naval Communications Station as a generator.
Where in Alaska?
Adak.
Okay.
Adak Island, which is one island away from Siberia. I mean, it's way out there in the Bering Sea. So we landed, and it's a long flight from Anchorage to out to Adak. It's like 6 hours in a prop airplane. It really bad. So I get out there, and I get met at the airport by these guys, and they put me in a van and took me to their radio station and TV station, which was in the basement of called the Bering Building. And they welcomed me, and I started, doing radio and television. I was on doing the news. I was the host of the $1 Million Movie, which was actually worth about $295. There was some pretty bad movie. Flight Nurse was one of the movies I remember. I mean, they're The Door with 7 Locks, movies you probably never heard of before. So about 2 weeks after I'm there, I get a visit from the commander of the Naval Communications Station, wondering why I didn't show up for duty. He knew where I was because he saw me on television. So he came down, and they made an arrangement to let me stay with Armed Forces Radio in Alaska. So doing morning shows, I helped Santa Claus. We read letters. We did fundraisers to help raise money for the schools and the school and stuff. Because there were families. There were like 5,000 people on this island. Later on, they got a McDonald's, which I was really surprised. Not when I was there, but they evidently had a McDonald's. But so we did a lot of community service stuff. And that's what the radio station was all about. A Saturday night, I would do a record hop at the Adak Teen Club. Now, I do have a recording of that because we had recording equipment. So every once in a while, I'll sit and listen to that. I go, wow, making dedications, to Jim and Susie.
Yes.
But so after a year, I was supposed to be moving on to another duty station. And by the way, it got like 48 degrees below zero was the coldest I ever survived up there. And we were out at our cabin. We had you could claim an old building from World War II, and we claimed a water tower, and we cut out a hole to make a door and stuff, and anyhow, that was our cabin that we would go to and spend weekends out there. But after a year, I was going to be transferred to another duty station, probably somewhere I didn't want to go, like Guam or Midway or one of those places. So I said, "Can I stay?" And they said, "Yeah, but you have to go see a psychiatrist." I go, "Why?"
Really?
Anybody who wanted to stay there had to be crazy. So I evidently passed the exam. No, I had a girlfriend there who was a school teacher, so I had companionship and plus the radio and stuff, and I really loved it. I mean, Alaska was it was cold, but it was just beautiful.
Quiet.
Yeah. Yeah.
You say there's 5,000 people, so there's not a lot of people on the island.
No. And they were all families. I mean, there were so many families that I got they got.
Did you eat whale? Did you eat whale?
No.
Okay.
No, we did eat. That's why I don't eat seafood any longer. We had all the Alaska king crab we could get for free. Mm-hmm. And our game was we'd get 4.
Yeah. Speaking of that,
you couldn't get a bunch of them. You could get maybe 3 or 4. And when they're upside down, they're immobile. But when you turn them right side up, they scramble like a. And that's what we used to do at the parties. We would bring the king crab in. They'd be alive, and they'd be in the box, and they'd be go, "Oh, yeah, we're here." And then we'd turn them upside down, and of course, all the girls would scream and jump on the couches and things.
What was it like to be in the dark for a portion? I mean, tell me about
that was the hard part. It wasn't as bad as like living in Norway and Sweden, but we did have during the winter we would have maybe 2 or 3 hours of daylight, not necessarily sunlight, but daylight. So it was hard to get accustomed to that. And one of the things we tried to do, with the radio and TV, is to try to alleviate some of that. Like we had a dog sled race. I mean, dog sled race. There are no dog sleds up there, but we encourage people to attach your dog to a sled of some sort, and you'd race down this hill that had a good, probably a 2% grade or something to it. So we were going to have this. We put the cameras through the windows of the station was in the basement of this building. So we poked the cameras out through the window. We couldn't take them outside because they weren't really portable. And we had this dog sled race. And I was narrating it, and it was wonderful. As we were getting ready to do it, though, I looked outside, and all the streets were bare. The street crew came back, took all the snow off the road. We're not going to be able to have a dog sled race. So I called the people at the Publix or whatever, and I said, "Can you guys put the snow back?" "You crazy Seabees, what are you doing?" So they went down to the airport and loaded up all the snow, brought it back up and dumped it on the street. And can you imagine guys who have been out, Navy guys who have been out drinking, Marines too maybe, and then they wake up in the morning on a Saturday morning and say, "Oh, they're dumping snow in the street." Okay, that's good. So after 4 years, I was discharged from the Navy, and I separated out of Seattle. Spent a couple months in Seattle because a girl there that I met wanted to have some modeling pictures done. So I took some modeling pictures, and that's a whole other story.
I bet. What happened to the school teacher?
Well, it was her brother who actually met me at the airport in a VW hippie bus and took me and he introduced me to this girl. I don't know whatever happened. Guys don't keep track of things.
Right.
There's a girl I met in Sydney, Australia, Bernadette. Every time I play the Four Chops Bernadette, I think of her, and I lost track of her after a couple of years. I spent 2 weeks down in Sydney, and it was anyhow. So I leave.
You're in Seattle.
I leave Seattle, and I got homesick for Erie. Really? You're homesick for Erie? Oh yeah. So I came back, and at my parents' house on 32nd Street was this giant crate, and it was all my possessions and belongings, plus a few things that maybe got accidentally put in there. The guys kind of went to the library and put a whole bunch of 16-millimeter films. I have original Star Trek's, Mission Impossible, Shindig.
Shindig!
And they're all 16-millimeter. Now, I don't have a projector to show them any longer. It died. One of these days, I should see if I can get another projector and maybe digitize
So you have
some
this
of these.
huge crate waiting for you here.
Yeah, and that's
in
all.
town.
That's all my stuff. And then I go, okay, well, let's see. I have GI Bill, which back in those days would pay for your college. If you went to somewhere like Penn State, you could be there for 4 years. But I decided to go to Mercyhurst because it was right up the hill from where we were living. And that was all farmland back in those days. So I enrolled at Mercyhurst as a provisional student. So I'm 20, 18, 19, 20, 21 or 22 when I enrolled. So I was an old guy. I was an old freshman. And I managed to, meet my wife at the time. That's a whole other story that probably not very interesting. But anyhow, I met my wife at Mercyhurst. I built their first radio station, which was a carrier current station, which meant you had to have your radio close to a electrical outlet, and then you could hear the radio station. So we built a carrier current radio station. And I got part-time at WRIE with Dale Manning, who was the night guy, and Jim King was there. Trying to think who else was there. Oogie Pringle.
Oogie Pringle.
Yeah. So I was doing a show at WRIE, and Dale Manning, who was the night guy, had a offer to go up to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan to work at this radio station. The radio station was not doing very well. So he said, Dennis, would you like to come along? I go, full-time? Yeah. Program director? Yeah. Music director? Yeah. And morning guy? Oh, let me pack my bags. So we had Jim King, who had this voice, kind of like Jim Conner's. It was one of those. We had him do all the station IDs and liners and stuff for us. And he called it, we thought it was pronounced St. Ignace, Ignace. So we had him do all the St. Ignace, the 5,000-watt voice of Northern Michigan. Dale calls me one day. He says, we got to get him changed. It's St. Ignace. It's not Ignace. So I had to go get a hold of Jim and say, Jim, we had to completely redo all those things you did for us. So I went up there as a morning guy. I was up there.
Did you like Michigan?
I loved it. The Upper Peninsula, so we would go to Mackinac Island on Sunday afternoons. Since all the guys on the boats knew me, and I talked always good about the boats and about the Grand Hotel and things, we never had to pay for a boat ride, a ferry ride. And my wife and I would go over and we'd spend the day on Mackinac Island, up in the interior, and watch all the tourists and things. And then I wanted to get closer to home. I actually wanted to break into the Pittsburgh market. So I started applying for radio stations in the Pittsburgh area. And Franklin, by Oil City, Titusville, they needed a program director, music director, so I was hired.
What were the call letters?
WFRA, WVEN. So they were simulcast at the time. Later on, we separated where VEN, the FM, had its own format.
When did you end up on FM?
That was on WVEN. So I did both AM and FM. They were together. And then, so that was 13 years. 13 years. And we loved Franklin. We had a nice house. We had everybody. I was a little fish in a big pond. Is that the word for it? Or a big fish? Anyhow.
Yes.
You
were a big fish in is it a big fish in a small pond?
Maybe. I know that I had.
But Franklin's beautiful.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And of course, we did the same thing I did. I was a firm believer in radio being able to do things for people that are in need. Salvation Army came to us and said, we don't have enough canned goods for the Thanksgiving give out. What can you do to help? I go, I'll lock myself in the studio. Now, you couldn't lock yourself in the studio, but it's radio. So I locked myself in the studio until we get 1,000 canned goods. I'm not going to be allowed to get out of here. Well, within a couple hours, we raised 1,000 canned goods. And then every year we would do a canned good drive for the Salvation Army. When I left, 33,000 items were donated over like a 2-year period or two-week period. And we would do live remotes and things. We got these local supermarkets to help out. People could go in and buy a case of soup. And
So you had this full-time gig down in Franklin for 13 years.
Yep.
In the meantime, I know that, did you go back to school? I mean, I'm trying to figure out how you ended up at Duquesne University.
Yeah, well, this is the sad story. I had never been fired or let go for even some of the antics that I did. But the owner of the radio station decided to bring his son in to kind of help out with the radio station, and he didn't like us. He didn't like us old people. He knew about as much about radio that I know about brain surgery. But anyhow, he was the owner's son, and he decided one Saturday morning they called me into the office and said, "Okay, turn in your keys. You're done." My world came crashing down. I had a family. We had babies. We had a house. We had a mortgage. We had car, loans and everything. And now I'm out of a job for no reason other than the owner's son is just
coming in.
Yeah. So we moved there with my mother and father-in-law down in New Kensington, right outside of Pittsburgh. So there were the 5 of us, plus my mother and father-in-law in this house that my father-in-law built, that I live in now. So
interesting.
So anyhow, so when I was down I was trying to get a job, doing radio. I managed to get a job doing some television production and things. And somebody said, if you really need a degree. So I had 2 years at Mercyhurst. That's when the money ran out. So I go, okay. Somebody said, go to Duquesne. I can't even walk in the doors of Duquesne. Are you kidding? That's an expensive school.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I did walk in the doors, and they gave me a provisional. They said, "Well, you prove yourself for one semester, and we'll, see about admitting you." Because once again, I was about 30, so I was a really
starting
old,
all over
I was
again.
a really old guy
Mm-hmm.
with all these young whippersnappers, hanging around, which turned out to be, to this day, some of my best friends. We still meet for lunch and dinner and things because we just got to be good friends. And they helped me, get through this college stuff. Well, while I was at Duquesne, they discovered that I knew a lot about video production, photography, all that. So they had me as a assistant to a couple classes. And then after they discovered that I probably knew more than the instructors did, they were giving me classes. So they gave me classes to teach, and eventually we built the multimedia department and taught broadcasters and built the TV closed circuit TV station for it was on the cable system.
So did you end up working for Duquesne when it was all said and done?
Yeah, because in order for me to get some money for going to school, they gave me a work-study job, which was at WDUQ, which was a jazz station. I had no knowledge of jazz. I mean, I knew the jazz, players, but I had no idea about all jazz. So Tony Moad, who was the one disc jockey there, he was like the king of jazz for Pittsburgh, and he discovered that I liked the same kind of music that he did. So when he would go on a cruise, and he'd go on like 5 cruises a year, they'd need somebody to sit in and do the show. So they would have me do the show for him, and he liked it because I picked the kind of music, and I just picked it by ear. He picked it he could look at the title but I had to listen to it to see if, I liked it. So anyhow, I wound up doing that as a
You were a jazz man for a while.
I was playing jazz, yeah. And I used my regular voice, and we used to comment because the radio station, Evidently had a problem with the heating and air conditioning system. Most radio stations do. And it would get really hot in the studio.
Kind of like right now.
Yeah. So we would make jokes about, we don't even have to order out a pizza. We can just cook it on the. So we had a lot of jokes, and I did a Saturday afternoon, a jazz request show. Who would have thought a jazz request show? And people would call in with this stuff, and I have no idea who these people are. But they had a great library, and my children would come. Jonathan, my oldest, would come and help me, and he'd be running into the record library, which was down the corner, around the hallway, and through 2 or 3 doors. It wasn't close. And find the records or the CDs and bring them in, and then I would play them and make dedications and stuff. So,
our night guy, Dr. Denny Woytek, getting up close and personal. Now, all of a sudden, you're doing jazz music. You're at Duquesne, and now you really are a doctor. How?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
yeah. So I got my undergrad at Duquesne. I finished my degree.
What was your undergrad degree at?
Bachelor's in communication.
Okay.
And then somebody said, you know what, you probably maybe if you want to continue to teach, maybe you need to get a master's. You didn't have to, but they recommended a master's, and they recommended also later a PhD. But so
here you are.
John Shepard, who was beginning a program called Multimedia Technology. This was computer animation and websites, all this stuff that was brand new. And he was starting this program, and somebody said, go over and see John Shepard. So I went to his office, and it was like a graveyard for computers. It, just stuff. Everything was in this. He was kind of an eclectic guy, but he said, wow, you know this, some of this stuff. I said, yeah, I do. So he hired me as a professor, gave me the title assistant professor.
So you were a professor.
Yes, assistant professor, and I earned my master's teaching classes. So I'd be teaching a class in animation. At the same time, I'm getting credit for, teaching animation. I worked with the people at Pixar and Lucas Films.
That's groovy stuff.
Yeah, there was some nice stuff. And then somebody said, you know what? You probably need to get a PhD. And I go, what's PhD? And piled high and deeper? I said, I'm a guy from Erie. I'm a disc jockey. That
would scare me too.
I didn't think I had those kind of smarts. Mm-hmm.
But you do have those smarts.
Evidently, somebody believed in me and said,
That's
can you?
fantastic.
So I wound up. It took 2 years of coursework, which meant reading 21 books the first summer, 32 books the second summer. And this was a brand new PhD in rhetoric, which is, I used to describe it as, put somebody in a round room and ask them to find a corner.
That's what I was going to say. Rhetoric is.
Well, I thought, why? But then I started using it in my teaching. And I would tell stories. I would show them the class pictures and things. Real life examples. This wasn't. I wasn't. Standing up there with a lector and just reading off things. I was showing them examples. I would go out with them on field trips. We would do every year at Seven Springs, a ski resort. We would go out there, and I would take 4 or 5 students. Pile in my Monte Carlo, and we'd drive down there. And we'd spend the whole day doing interviews and then package the whole thing together into a half-hour television show. So this got them broadcasting experience, got them away from the campus, and put them in dangerous situations that weren't dangerous. And so we kept doing this with the students. Wait a minute, I have to go back. So 2 years coursework. I mean, I read books that I've never read again. I still have them.
I was going to say, was there any book that stood out during that time? Because that's a lot of books.
Hannah Arendt was one of the authors. So I would do papers. You'd have to write papers about all this stuff and present them. Put them in for presenting at a conference. Well, this one conference I'm at, I don't know, I forget where it was. I think it was maybe in Miami. And I had to present this paper that I had proposed. And it was a Saturday morning at 9 a.m. And I go, who in their right mind is going to come to my presentation Saturday morning at 9 a.m.? So I'm standing there and getting ready, and all of a sudden the room is starting to fill up, and they're starting to bring in chairs from outside. And pretty soon I look around, and three of these big rhetoricians.
Rhetoricians. I never knew there were rhetoricians either.
These guys were there. And talk about sweat. First of all, I hope I gave them correct credit or quoted them correctly, which it so happened, they actually afterward they came up and said, hey, congratulations and stuff. I go, wow. So I was getting the feeling that I could do this, but I still had to write my dissertation, which means you have to make a proposal to the department, and it was the Department of Communication at Duquesne, and which is different from the multimedia department that I was in. So we had to make a proposal. It was like 23 pages of what I wanted to do. They said, no, we'd like you to do your dissertation on the 13th century Roman culture. I go, that's about as interesting as... So I asked them, I said, okay, here's what I want to do. I want to do my dissertation on memory. I want to go from private memory and how it becomes public memory. So I had to base everything on all the rhetoricians I talked about, public and private memory. And I used the Vietnam soldier as my way of getting, because, Vietnam guys,
how great.
We just didn't talk about it. There were so many who did.
And they're still having trouble talking about it.
I did talk about it because I told my kids. My kids all knew my story. That, I think, kind of helped me, get through all of this. So I'm doing this dissertation on how Vietnam veterans, you took private memory and made it public. And some of the things were the internet. The Vietnam Memorial was a whole chapter I did on the Vietnam Memorial, the wall in D.C., because that I felt was the biggest thing that would help many veterans come to terms and realize that they can tell their loved ones, they can tell them the stories about what they did and how they did it. Yeah. Yep. So it took 7 years to write that dissertation. Because you'd write a chapter, you'd give it to them, they'd read it, they'd critique it, they'd say, do this, you can't do this. So
7 years.
Yeah, 800 pages was the final dissertation. They say you got to cut it down to 5.
A radio guy from Erie.
Yeah.
With a 700-page paper.
Said you got to cut it down to 500.
Oh.
So you just don't go in and slash and burn, because if you take something out, it may have been referenced earlier or later. So you've really got
Denny, you're really a genius.
No. You've got to do it word by word and got to make sure that you cover, everything. So now, I should say, before you could even make your proposal, you had to pass a comprehensive exam, which was 2 days, 2 Saturdays, 2 questions that you don't know what the questions were until you get there. No notes, no books, just a computer.
And you'd have to write.
And you had to write.
Answer these questions.
Yeah.
And of course, there's no artificial intelligence going on here, people.
Nope.
Right?
You had to know.
No.
You had to know, and you had to be able to quote and things. And so the first time I did it, I got 3 pass and I got 1 non-pass. I just thought they were messing with me, so I had to do that one again. So I did do that one and passed it. Then I could make my proposal for the dissertation. So I get the dissertation all finished, cut it down to 500 pages, and then I had to defend it, which means that you
Did you have to go in front of a panel of judges to defend that?
Yep, in front of the people who in the department. First of all, your department chair, and the whoever was your dissertation director, and then all the other people, and you had 10 minutes to defend it, and then they could ask any questions they wanted to about your dissertation. Talk about sweating bullets. And then my whole family is outside this classroom and waiting. And my parish priest was there because he thought he needed to help, show support. And after I was done, and
do they tell you right away then?
They tell you right away, and they walked me out, and they introduced me as Dr. Dennis Woytek.
Dr. Dennis. And
then they said, you know what, bringing a priest along with you is kind of like stacking the deck. I didn't invite him. He wanted to come. He was one of the guys who kept encouraging me because 7 years.
That's a long
time. I was about ready to give up. It's just like, is this really worth it?
So in the meantime, you're working at Duquesne the entire time.
Yeah, I'm still working. I'm teaching full load, teaching 4 classes a week, or 4 courses a week. Some of them are Monday,
When did
Wednesday,
you retire from Duquesne then?
2016. I had been fed up with politics of the department. It had changed a lot.
I'm sure you've seen a lot. How long were you at Duquesne?
21 years.
I did try out for the Tamburitzans.
Oh, did you?
I did.
I did.
I just came out of high school, and my dad took me down to Duquesne, and I was in the top 50. I didn't get in, but that would have been a 4-year scholarship for me, and that was something I could have been a Duquesne.
I just had lunch 3 weeks ago with a former Tammy that I still keep in touch with. So I would produce videos for the Tamburitzans.
Yes, they used to come. That's my dad loved them. They used to come to the Warner.
Oh, they're tough. That's a tough group.
And my dad would, I don't ever recall ever seeing them, but I was like, hey, Dad, I think that. He's like, you should try to become a Tamburitzan. I bet you could do this. And then, they scaled it down to like the top 50. And then we all went down there. And I remember playing on my 59 Fender Mustang.
Wow.
I played Malaguena, which was a really, really tough piece.
Oh, yeah.
I played Malaguena, and then I sang. Then I did something with singing. And then they asked me if I ever danced before. And I said, no, but I have great rhythm. But that didn't help. So I didn't get into Duquesne, but I did. I was in their performing arts department there for just a day.
I had so much respect for the Tammies.
Yes.
And because
are they still?
They're still. Duquesne has cut the funding for, they used to fund it. And I think that was a dumb move on their part. Because that was that's a moniker is a word that comes to mind, but it's a symbol of what Duquesne is when they would go around. They what was I going to say about the Tammies?
They traveled everywhere.
Oh yeah.
That's what my dad said. You'll get to travel if you get to be a Tamburitzan. Not only are you getting a 4-year college degree, you're also traveling.
Now I hear stories about traveling on a bus that can't repeat them, but you know what? They were full-time students.
I know.
Just because they were out on the road
didn't mean that they weren't doing their studies.
That meant if they were out on a weekend and they're Monday morning, their stuff had to be done. Their work had to be done, and they were just that caliber of student. I would have
loved to have been part of that. I was ever so close. I do want to ask you, since you were down at Duquesne and you spent all that time there, did you ever spend time with Fred Rogers?
Oh, yeah.
Can you give me a Fred Rogers story? Because I know that you were in the whole communication aspect down there. Tell me about Fred.
Fred's story is an eerie story. It was the National Firemen's Convention Parade, and I don't remember what year, but it was on 12th Street. Fred Rogers and myself and Mr. McFeely were on the back of this flatbed truck in the hot, boiling sun describing fire trucks.
Really?
And
how did you meet Fred?
Well, that's where I met him.
That's where you met him.
That's where I met him. And it was broadcast live on PBS. If I remember, I think QLN was the production house for it, and that's where I met Fred. And every time I would see Fred at events down in Pittsburgh, he would always remind me about that flatbed trailer. I go, yeah, it would have been nice. They didn't have pop-ups, back in those days.
No.
Or never thought about using umbrellas. But, it's a 57 pumper with 25 million gallons and 18 feet of hose, number 3. That's how we had a giant notebook, and every fire truck that went by would have to describe it. There were no bands, as far as I know.
So you met Fred right here in Erie.
Yep.
Did you ever have, spend any time with him down in Pittsburgh?
No. Oh, yeah, maybe. I guess I did, because I used to go to WQED, which is the public station in Pittsburgh, and I would be down there periodically for things. So, and we would spend some time socializing a little bit. He would be at an event, and I would be at the event, and so
he's one of my heroes.
Oh,
one of my heroes.
My children grew up with Sesame Street, the Electric Company, 321 Contact, and Fred Rogers. And my grandchildren are growing up with Fred Rogers. My grandson Andrew.
How many grandbabies do you have now? You got six.
Yeah, 2 in Maryland and 4 in Pittsburgh. But the oldest in Pittsburgh, Andrew, he's 9. He said he wished he could meet Fred Rogers because he learned so much from Fred. So I said, well, we'll take you to show you where Fred is buried now. I said, just, he's up there, and he's watching down on you. Oh. So anyhow, yeah, Fred was one of those guys, people made fun of him.
I know.
But you know what? He was a teacher. He really knew how to get to people and how to teach children to be kind,
and a
gentle.
Heart of gold.
And
Heart of gold.
Yeah.
Read several books on him too. And when I was in college, of course, I ended up at Gannon. There was I took a costuming class from one of the ladies. She was a prof down at Gannon, and I can't remember her name. And she said, she interned for Fred.
Yeah.
And she said then she worked for him for a couple years, and always talked about what a wonderful person he was, and how important he was for our children.
He was a real person.
Yes.
He didn't have a.
I'm hoping they say the same thing about me, Den.
He wasn't like
all you want to be is a real person.
He wasn't like Pappy, who came and did the Pappy show on Channel 12. This was Fred was what, no matter what however you met him, he was the same person. He didn't have an act to put on.
No.
He just
so now you're retired. You got the 6 grandbabies.
Yeah. So 2016, I decided
you're still doing radio.
I was going to retire. 2016, I go, okay. I think.
Did Dan call you? How did you end up on WMCE, Dr. Denny Woytek?
Well, let's see. I came up to Mercyhurst because I heard they had Mercyhurst had an FM station. And I go, I want to go up and visit and see what they're, just check it out. So I drove up unannounced, showed up, found the station, and Dan was in there, and I introduced myself and met Dan, and we started.
So that was the first time you ever met Dan?
Yeah. And we started talking.
Dan connected you to this wonderful radio station.
Yeah, and that was, of course, in the bunker of Boogie.
Yeah.
And it smelled like the athletic department was right next door, so it had an odor to it all its own. But he asked me, he says, "Would you mind doing a show?" I go, "I don't think I can drive up to Erie every weekend." Mm-hmm. He says, "Well, you don't have to worry about it. You can do it from your house." Do it from my house? You're kidding.
Oh.
So that's when I started doing remote.
And now you're our night guy?
Monday.
You're not only the night guy for WMCE, but you're the night guy on WSRQ.
Yeah.
Down in Sarasota, Bradenton, which, by the way, is the 69th radio market in the country. That's big stuff, Dan.
Yeah. Somebody asked me, they go, is it the same show? I go, it's the same music, 60s, 70s, and 80s. Mm-hmm. But it's not the same show because when I'm doing the Florida show, I talk about things that are
Going on in Florida.
there.
Yes.
So when I do the Erie show, I do the things that are going on in Erie. It's not like, and I have dreams every once in a while of me sitting in that control room at WJET. But when they had a little box on the side, and they had cart machines that held the commercials, and they had a button. But when you eject them, sometimes they hit you in the leg. But they had a box and they had a little red light on it. When you press that, you got a singing time jingle. It's 4:42 on WJET. Bum, bum. I used to love that. Myron Jones' wife, Kay, would always call me, "Don't play those so much."
Myron's wife would call you.
Yeah, you spend a lot of money, getting these recorded because they're.
Did you like? And I know, and I haven't had the dream in a while, but there were times when I would have dreams of dead air and just be in a cold sweat.
I would have dreams that I'd come into the studio to do my show, and all the records were classical. Or there weren't any records there, or maybe there were 5 records there. But right. Just the feeling of working in the radio studios are not unless they're on where people can see, they're not the best. I mean, Jet was plywood and baling wire
yes.
But when I remember, and when I'm doing my shows now, sometimes I remember what it was like sitting in that control room. Oh, a quick little story about one of the first times I was doing Sunday mornings at Jet. They didn't tell me that this group was going to come in and do a live half-hour religious show. And they didn't tell me how to turn the other microphone on. There were 2 microphones, and I knew how to do the one that, we used to call them a bird cage, the LTEC, big LTEC mics. But no one told me how to turn the other mic on, so I was flipping switches to try to figure out, how to get this thing to work.
I see it.
But, they got accordions and violins, and they're doing that. I go, oh, it's a hootenanny here.
But I know, and every time I would start on a new board somewhere, I would just I wouldn't sleep the night before.
Yeah.
I'm like, I know that I've got to do this, that.
Since I did electronics, I had to repair a lot of these boards. And
I'm sure.
Some of the boards, like the board we had in Franklin, was one of these old Collins boards that didn't have, they had, dials.
Dials. Yeah. I started on the dials.
However, it didn't control the actual volume. It controlled a light that controlled a diode that controlled how much volume went through. So it wasn't like, physical, it was a fader, but it would.
Right.
But I had to repair a lot of those. It just, because their boss wouldn't spend any money. And
Denny,
I could tell you stories about transmitters. And
what great history you bring here to the station today, man. I'm telling you, I'm so impressed with the PhD and the dissertations and everything else that you've done. You've been in Alaska, you've been in Australia, you've been all over the place. You are one interesting individual, and we're really happy to have you.
Thanks. I was only electrocuted once.
Was it bad, though? I shouldn't laugh.
5,000 watts, and it threw me outside the building, and I woke up about half an hour later looking at the sky saying, what happened?
Oh my gosh.
I forgot to use, there's a stick that you have to use.
The only time I've ever been electrocuted, Denny, is when the band's been playing and my microphone, something's not happening, and it wasn't grounded. And I put my lips on that microphone, and it was an ouch.
Musicians have been killed.
I know.
With that.
I know. I'm glad you're still here to talk about your 5,000 watts.
Me too. But anyhow, you have to use the stick, and they called it the Jesus stick because they said if you didn't use it, you would go to meet Jesus.
There you go.
I thought I did, but evidently I didn't. And bam.
Thanks, Denny, for coming on today on Breakfast with Nat.
Thanks for letting me hang out.
I know. I love it. Thank you so much. And to everybody else, enjoy the Polka Show coming up with Bob and Alice. Make it a great week in the 814.
You've been tuned in to Breakfast with Nat the Hat in the 814, sponsored by Erie Insurance on 88.5 and 102.7 LECOM Radio.